Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Ask an Assistant, the podcast for executive assistants and the people that love them. I'm your host, Jess Lindgren. Let's get to work. This week, we are talking about daylight savings time, summertime, however you might like to call it. Daylight saving and daylight savings time has been ruled correct on Jeopardy! More than once. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If Alex Trebek was wrong, I don't want to be right. Thankfully, it's 2024, right? A lot of clocks, by and large, auto-update, at least in my life. Our car is a 2011 model, and even that auto-updates when the time change happens. It's super handy. I truly have not been late to work in over a decade, which is great. Presently in today's world, there are 195 countries. The standard that I am using for recording this podcast at the time of recording in March of 2024, there are 193 United Nations recognized sovereign countries and 2 observer states. And presently, about 70 of those countries change their clocks twice yearly, no matter what they might call it, daylight savings time, summertime, what have you. About 140 total countries have used daylight savings time at least once since the 19-teens when it was formally adopted, and about half of them have since abolished the practice. In 2024's world, some notable non-observers are some pretty high population countries, including China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, here in the United States where I live, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and, quote, most of Arizona, which I did not know until I started to research into this episode, that the Navajo Nation actually opts to observe daylight savings time. So the bulk of Arizona does not, but any members of the Navajo Nation in northeastern Arizona do. In the United States, the time change happens this weekend on Sunday, March 10th at 2 a.m. local time. The clocks will, quote, spring ahead 1 hour, leaving humans feeling a bit groggy until we change our clocks again in the fall, and the kiddies of this house feeling off their eating rhythms and sleeping and playtime routines. So it's always an adventure in our home. Again, just knowing that most of the clocks do auto update. It's great. It's one less thing to feel stressed about, but it does just leave us all, again, at least in this household, feeling a little bit off for a week or two and feeling very jarred again in the fall when the clocks change again. In much of the rest of the daylight savings time observing world, the change will happen later this month on Sunday, March 31st, and there are a smattering of other dates in the mix. Some of those outliers are definitely in the southern hemisphere where the date won't change, the time won't change until April, so even a week after the bulk of the rest of the daylight savings time observing countries. At times over the past 10 years of working with my executive, we've had clients and students all over the world. Some high concentrations of folks that we've worked with have been in the United States, spread out, from California to New York, even a couple of people in Puerto Rico, definitely some folks in Europe, Canada, India, and Australia. A notable example that honestly makes me tired to even just think about it is we had a coaching client whose availability wasn't great to begin with. They were a pretty dedicated business owner, parent, very involved member of their community. And especially when you're spanning a time zone between California to Australia. When the twice yearly time shift would come around, I always had timeanddate.com pulled up to do my calculations for me, just to triple check, make sure that I was quoting the right day and time, both for us and for the client. The US and Australia don't change time at the same time. Some parts of Australia don't change at all. And the coaching client would sometimes travel to those other parts while still wanting to keep a coaching call on the books, which I had just moved to California from Minnesota and trying to wrap my head around, the seasons being opposite, the northern versus the southern hemisphere, the time zone span between California to Australia, and then if they were in the daylight savings time observing part of Australia versus a non-daylight savings time. Like, again, I'm tired even just thinking about it. And this was years ago. Another fun example is India. We've had coaching clients in India before. Not only does the country not observe daylight savings time at all, they are 13 and a half hours ahead of California. So if it's 10 a.m. in California, it is, I should have done the math on this before I started recording. So 10 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. would be the split that we'd be working with there. It's just always an adventure. And I know that daylight savings time is an issue for governments to decide, but I think that there are some promising changes on the horizon. Personally, I feel like it's 2024. There have been so many advancements just in terms of technology, even simple things like there's a really great episode of a podcast called You're Wrong About, the Kitty Genevieve's bystander apathy episode, where they talk about the lights that we have, just street lights, on any given street corner. Just the fact that our streets are so much more well lit. New York City specifically implemented better street lighting in the wake of Kitty Genevieve's murder back in the 60s. So just even in terms of things that we all kind of take for granted, I was born in the 80s personally. Some of you might have been born before or after that decade. Things that you just they've always been a part of your life as far as you've had crisp, clear memories, and you just kind of think like, that they had to start somewhere and sometime and as a result of something, but you just kind of always assumed that they were always there because they were always there during your lifetime. Even just since the 60s, like outdoor lighting technology has changed so much in recent years. The lights inside and outside our cars have changed so much. Technology devices inside of our homes have changed so much. We all walk around with cell phones. Maybe a lot of us walk around with smartwatches. Like there are just so many devices that make our lives better, even when, daylight isn't perfect. So I really think that that's a great step forward toward just abolishing the time changes. There are definitely people who have strong opinions as to whether we should all observe standard time versus daylight savings time or summertime. I'm not one of those people. I don't really have a strong opinion. I just want to stop changing the clocks. So wherever things might land, it's good by me. Here in the United States, about a dozen states have attempted to push bills through either to conform to standard time year-round or to be part of the Sunshine Protection Act, which would change the country to daylight saving, well, not the country, but individual states, would change individual states to daylight savings time year-round. I did find in my research for this episode, the U.S. Department of Transportation says, under the Uniform Time Act, as amended, states may exempt themselves from observing daylight saving time by state law. If a state chooses to observe daylight saving time, it must begin and end on federally mandated dates. So meaning states can choose to abolish daylight savings time, but then they must observe standard time year round. Again, I don't really care which one we pick, whether we need to go through the hassle of establishing something like the Sunshine Protection Act, or if we just abolish observing daylight savings time and just go with standard time. I don't care. I just really want to stop flipping my clock. I personally am of the belief that if New York and California dropped it, I feel like a lot of other states would feel compelled to follow suit. I also found during my research for this episode that the European Union might abolish daylight savings time as early as 2025, which, hello, we're already at the end of Q1 2024. So I think that's another thing, that if something as big as the EU were to let it go, that a lot of other parts of the world would follow suit. Our professional lives aside, daylight savings time has definitely fallen at some surprisingly inconvenient times over the years. Last year was especially inconvenient. It happened to be a day that I was flying from Minnesota to New York. I spent from Minnesota to California. I had spent an unexpected 10 days in Minnesota. My dad died last year, so my sister, my brothers, and I all convened back home in Minnesota with my mom and spent some good time, together. But after some pretty sad and stressful time getting back to the airport in Minneapolis to fly out to San Diego for work and a tiny vacation, let's be real, definitely planned a couple extra days out on the West Coast to relax. The timing on that could not have been better, but the timing of the daylight savings time switch was awful. It happened to be Saturday night into a Sunday morning flight. Just being at my cousin's home. Thankfully, I've got a really wonderful cousin who lives very close to the Minneapolis airport. Shout out to Matt. You're amazing. You take care of all of us. But staying at Matt's house and just absolutely stressed out of my mind for many reasons, personal and professional. And the daylight savings time on top of that did not help. It was a very interesting evening of trying to convince myself to fall asleep, that I would for sure wake up on time in the morning. I believe I needed to be at the airport at 6 a.m. for a 7:30 a.m. flight. And the number of alarms I had on my phone was really impressive. It was just like, okay, wake up for real. Really for reals, it's time to wake up. Like just adding alarm after alarm after alarm to make myself feel comfortable that I would wake up and make it to the airport on time was not fun. This year my executive is traveling as well over the time shift, but thankfully he will be close to home. He will be in his home time zone. He's not switching time zones as well as the daylight savings time swap. That was my thing last year is I had already left New York. I was in Minnesota for a stressful 10 days and then going to California for another, it was, 6-7 days. But just all of the time zone switching on top of the daylight savings time switch was a lot. So again, really thankful that my executive, even though he is traveling this weekend over the time zone switch, will be staying in the Pacific time zone. So one less thing to stress about. He'll be fine, but I'm definitely still going to worry just a teeny tiny bit that everything's going to go to plan while he is out and about. So that's everything for this week. Double check anything in your life that needs a manual time change. Read the instructions for your stove and your microwave clocks. Maybe after all these years, you've finally gotten the hang of it and you actually know how to make those changes. The internet is your friend. You may Google the instructions, punch in your make and model number, and it'll tell you exactly what to do if the appliance is giving you any sass. Treat yourself gently if the time change disrupts your sleep. Take a bath. I love a bath with Epsom salt. Drink some nice tea before you go to bed, chamomile, mint. We get local honey from a dude who's got like 1 million bees in his backyard. It's very cool. Just like have a nice meal before you go to bed. Wake up with a gentle routine. Take care of yourself on Sunday and make your voice heard about all the time changes. Whether it's with your elected officials, these people work for you. Like they are your elected officials. They're your representatives in government, whether it's local, state, or national. Tell them what you think. And the other place you can tell people what you think is askanassistant.com. I'd love to hear from you about this or anything else. And until next week, take care.